I did a couple of videos last year on Columbia House talking about the rise and fall of the company and how they made a fortune giving away music. After I did those videos, I heard from a bunch of insiders who told me what it was really like behind the scenes. I want to share some of those stories with you because they are super interesting. Let's dive into that. Okay, check this out. This first message or comment came from Michael D. Baker. And he wrote, I used to work for Columbia House for the Latin Music Club. A few interesting notes from the inside. The collection agencies they used were fake, I believe, or were toothless anyway. They never did anything beyond send a few letters. So if you recall, I talked about this in the video, and I heard from a ton of you as well who would join Columbia House or BMG or any of these music clubs and either use a fake name and get all this music and not pay anything for it, or just get out of paying it for a variety of reasons. This was a real thing. I don't know what percentage of people didn't pay their Columbia House bill, but it must have been really, really high. So now we have Michael here saying that, yeah, those collection agencies were fake. I remember once I did get into some trouble with Columbia House, and I can't remember if it was a phone call or if it was a letter from a collection agency, and I can't really remember how that all panned out. But anyway, he's saying that those are all fake. There's nothing there. He also wrote there were numerous ways to get out of buying the required products. Because of course the way the Columbia House worked, you got like a stack of music for a penny or for $1. And then you had to go and buy X amount of records for a regular retail price. So he's saying there were numerous ways to get out of buying the required products. Number one, say you were a minor. I guess if you're whatever jurisdiction you're in, if you're under 18, that contract, I guess, can't be enforced. He is saying pay with Amex or have Amex contact them. They never wanted to fight with Amex. That's interesting. Say you were filing for bankruptcy. They never checked. Would that really work? No, I can't pay my bills, man. I'm filing for bankruptcy. I'm not sure if that would work for any other company aside from Columbia House. I can't imagine telling that to anyone I owe money to. Say you were incarcerated, they never checked. Another one of those, really? And say you were moving out of the country. So yeah, that's definitely interesting. I know a lot of people got away with not paying their bills by using fake names. And if a collection agency came a knock and they said, yeah, no one by that name lives here, I don't know what you're talking about. This is interesting. Check this out. He said, we worked on these ancient VT series computer terminals. They were so old, they had difficulty finding programmers able to work on them, and as a result, brought programmers in from Russia. So they had ancient technology. And then he says, I wasn't a very good employee. Anytime a customer wrote in with a complaint, I'd send a free CD. If I had known this man, I would have written in with, I would have complained more. He said there were two options: send a free CD where the customer had to pay for postage, or send a free CD with postage paid. I always did the latter. Those were the days. That's awesome, man. That's a total trip down memory lane as a former Columbia House customer, but I enjoyed peeking there behind the curtain. Okay, check this out. This comment came from Indiana Bill. And he wrote, when I was about 20 years old, I worked at a Columbia House business that processed the orders. There was a room of about 20 people that compared the original form that the customer filled out by hand with the information that people in another room had typed on company printouts. An important position, but I imagine monotonous after a while, right? Just continuing to compare all of these. We would find some funky fake names that people would use on the forums. I remember getting names like Tony Iommi. Hey, who knew the Black Sabbath guitarist was a Columbia House customer? He could have been. Tom DeLuise, Santa Claus, and lots of jack-me-offs. It's a Bart Simpson thing. If the name was pretty unbelievable, we would throw it out. All right, so maybe those jack-me-offs didn't get those free records. Okay, check this out. This comment was left by Books, etc. I used to work at their call center and my mom worked at the factory. It is now Sony. When it was Columbia House, it employed most of the town. They would bring in carts of CDs and let us take what we wanted. It was a fun place to work. So I think this is in the US, I believe. There was a US operation, there was a Canadian operation, and maybe others as well. I don't know. But the US operation was in Terre Haute, Indiana. And for you Terre Hauteans, is that a thing? Pardon me if I got the pronunciation wrong, but I think I got it right. Anyway, so back to this comment. They would bring in carts of CDs and let us take what we wanted. Imagine that. This was a time before music streaming, before the internet, before file sharing, before any of that. So think back in the 80s, a brand new CD was 15 to 20 bucks. So it would definitely be a perk of working at Columbia House to be able to go through all these CDs and take what you want. That would be amazing for the music fan. For music fans, I mean, for me, that would have been like, wow, that would be killer, man. In that same vein, Brian Mason wrote this. He said, I grew up a mile from Columbia House in Terre Haute, Indiana. It was the largest employer in the county for many years, at times with over 3,000 employees. So this was huge, a huge operation. Now, listen to this. He said, they had an employee-only store where employees could purchase overruns and returns for little or nothing. So this story is a little different than the previous one. They weren't necessarily wheeling in carts of CDs, but they had a store where we can get these CDs as a staff member for next to nothing. He said, my dad worked for a local trucking company and he told me that they would go in there with dump trucks and Columbia House, listen to this, Columbia House would fill those dump trucks with records they weren't selling. They would then haul them to a secret dump site where they were covered with fill. The drivers were allowed to keep any records they wanted. We had an enormous record collection. This kind of reminds me, you heard that story back in the 80s when the video game industry imploded and Atari had an overabundance of ET games. And ET was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was overhyped. The game sucked. They had like, whatever, tens of thousands of ET cartridges left and they buried them in a dump. And there's a documentary a few years ago where someone wanted to explore this urban myth and actually went to that junkyard and started digging through and actually found all those ET cartridges from 1983 or whatever it was. So there's apparently then a dump somewhere filled with Columbia House records. Those records I'm sure are no longer playable, but wow, that is like, who knew? Who knew there's dumps somewhere full, I imagine, of thousands, if not tens of thousands of unsold Columbia House products. Okay, this message was from Carrie McNeil. I was born and raised in Terre Haute, and my mom worked for Columbia for several years in the early to mid 1960s. The plant facility is still out on Fruit Ridge Avenue, but Columbia Record Club is now a fond memory. I'm going to pull this up on Google Maps in a second, but before I do, this comment from Brennan High. He wrote, I live in the Terre Haute area. The old Columbia House plant was bought by Sony, where they produced CD, DVD, Blu-ray, and PlayStation games. They are now in the process of converting it into just a distribution center warehouse for PlayStation products. So that comment came a year ago. That turnover may be done now. Anyway, I looked it up. It looks like the address is 1800 Fruit Ridge Avenue in Terre Haute. So I'm looking on the map now. This looks like an industrial area. You can see now it says Sony DADC. What does that stand for? Look that up. Sony Digital Audio Disc Corporation. So yeah, it's a Sony thing. It's apparently a PlayStation thing now. Let's take this little guy and take it down to the road and see what the old Columbia House factory or plant look like. There we go, Sony DADC. That is pretty big, man. That is pretty big. So looking at this, that's where it all happened. This was the heart and soul, I guess, of the Columbia House empire, the Columbia House business. You can see there, it's obviously a large plant. And I assume it has changed a bit over the years, but this is where all your old Columbia House stuff was made and processed, I guess. So yeah, that's very cool. Okay, check this out. This comment was from Teletubby, and he wrote, they had a pressing distribution plant in Santa Maria, California, also in the 1970s. The first Saturday of every month, with a special pass, but not hard to acquire at all, you could dive through the returned, refused items and harvest a nice collection of vinyl quite easily. Cassettes too. $1 a piece, but you had to comb through the randomly displayed product in boxes. We figured 1 in 75 was the hit ratio. Good times we had. That would be awesome, man. I can't even imagine being a kid and entering this huge warehouse with all the stuff you could buy for $1. I love it. Okay, this comment is from De Palma. And De Palma wrote, I remember in college there were a group of students who worked in the mail room in one of the dorms, and they got busted for mail fraud over this. They had every student's name and address in the dorm and used it to join the clubs. When the tapes arrived, they just kept them and let the unsuspecting students deal with the consequences. Smart, but dirty. A dirty stunt, man. Dirty stunt. Were you a member of Columbia House or another music club? How was that experience? Let me know in the comments below. Also, check out this previous video I did on the rise and fall of Columbia House. I'll see you there in a minute. Until then, keep on spinning.